Welcome back. This is part 2 of our internal medicine clerkship faculty development series. This episode is all about feedback. Why are we doing this? It seems like a really long time ago that students and attendings could spend weeks together on the wards, and the learning opportunities seemed endless. These days, students and residents or attendings may only overlap for 7 to 14 days, and students are really feeling the impact. Many students report either not getting enough feedback or not any at all, or that the feedback is too vague or very positive, and they don't know how to learn and grow from day to day. Some of those students that get really vague and positive feedback then go on to receive evaluations where the selections are much lower than the feedback that they were given, and they feel cheated of an opportunity to grow while with their teacher. But from an attending perspective, you kind of get it, right? Because it's so hard to establish a relationship in such a short period of time where you can give such honest, constructive feedback that's going to lead to growth for the student. In this video, I'd like to give you a 5-point strategy for giving impactful feedback that stimulates growth for your student. We've actually already talked about the first 2 points in the last video, which you do on day 1 during expectation setting. Let's briefly review. The first point is that you must set an expectation for growth for all members of the team, including you, and an expectation that feedback will occur regularly. The second point during that expectation setting session is to identify skill-based learning goals for the week and to select a limited number of goals to work on during your time together, rather than trying to work on them all. To select skills effectively, a good place to start are the learning objectives for the clerkship, which can be found in our clerkship field guide or in the email that the clerkship sends you at the beginning of your teaching attending block. These 2 actions will help you set yourself up as a coach that will work along with your learner on specific skills, making tiny adjustments and tweaks along the way until they are doing it just right. The next 3 points are the what, how much, and when to give feedback. The what, or the content of your feedback, is the most complex, so let's start there. What we're about to suggest may be a total change from the type of feedback that you're currently giving in order to make it more actionable. We want you to shift from qualitative feedback that focuses on approval, or good versus bad, to feedback that is very behavioral, descriptive, and concrete, that is much more actionable for the student. Great, so let's dig into what actionable feedback means. This is a spectrum of feedback from least actionable on the left to most actionable on the right. Less actionable feedback is abstract and high inference. It often includes perception of quality, like good versus bad, and can feel a little bit judgmental. By contrast, more actionable feedback is going to be concrete and low inference, meaning that the feedback contains descriptions of behaviors that the observer wants to see more of or want to change. And you can see that in the example below. But a key component to giving behavioral descriptive feedback is that you need to know exactly what the gold standard looks like. And I really want to discourage you from using an internally developed model as your gold standard, whether that's from previous students or your own example. Internally developed models are problematic for a number of reasons. First, they're pretty susceptible to biases, whether that be recency bias or your own implicit biases. Secondly, it puts students at a disadvantage to not know what the gold standard is that they're working towards. On the other hand, a shared mental model, such as the RHYME framework, creates clarity between you and the student and equity between students at all different sites with different attendings. Students really love it when your goals are the same goals that they've just been told by the clerkship directors during their orientation. Using the RHYME framework actually gives you the descriptive language that you need that translates to actionable feedback. From a practical standpoint, how do you use the RHYME framework to give actionable skill-based feedback to students? Let's review a student example. It's day 1, and you're working with Sabrina, who's on her 2nd rotation of the year. During expectations, she states that she'd like to work on gathering an organized history and making her oral presentation more succinct and organized. You review the RHYME framework with her and decide to focus on just the reporting aspect of these 2 skills. You schedule an observed history for the next day. At the bedside, Sabrina takes a history of a patient presenting with chest pain. She takes an open-ended history, and the patient opens up to her and shares her story. When you finally walk out of the room, though, you realize that while 45 minutes have passed, she didn't gather key elements of the history like pleurisy or risk factors for pulmonary embolism or MI. What feedback would you give her? Where would you start? What you really want to tell her is that she needs to be more efficient, but she already knows that. Instead, you need to come up with some concrete descriptive feedback that she can act upon to get there. To help faculty and residents, we created observation and feedback tools that translate each skill into a collection of observed behaviors using the RHYME framework. Let's take a closer look. This is a great opportunity to talk about how much feedback you would give to Sabrina in this moment, since she has a lot of room for growth. While you're tempted to give her feedback points on the entire history, limit your feedback to a few actionable items at a time. So this is key point number 4 of our strategy. Make your feedback bite-sized. Here's an example of a piece of bite-sized feedback that aims at the larger goal of getting to a more organized history. This piece of feedback focuses on building a solid foundation for gathering an organized history by getting that baseline and then using time to organize them, even in complicated patient encounters. Our last key point of this strategy examines when you should give feedback. In general, you should give feedback iteratively and frequently, but how that happens can look different depending on the level of the learner. Let's use Sabrina's oral presentation as an example to think about this more. The next day, Sabrina gives her oral presentation on her patient with chest pain. It lasts 15 minutes, includes a lot of extraneous detail about things that are not pertinent, and then her assessment statement includes too many data points that are not translated into medicalese, but she correctly concludes that she thought the person had a PE. You see that she's working on reporting and hasn't yet reached interpreting for this particular patient. You decide that you want to help her identify and translate key elements of the presenting syndrome and use that to filter down history and physical exam. Feels like a big task. So how do you do this while still keeping the feedback bite-sized and actionable? So you could go about this in 2 ways. One way is the most common way I give feedback, which is to give bits of concrete feedback each day, either immediately or shortly after the skill you observe. This is a great approach for students who are at the interpreter level or refining a growing skill. But for students who are at the earlier end of the spectrum of their growth on the clerkship or who are struggling, we recommend investing in a longer feedback session earlier on and then following it by daily bite-sized feedback. So you would actually give minimal feedback in the moment, but later that day, sit with her for a focused skill coaching session. Here's an example. Let's say that you're working on helping her distill and translate her assessment statement. She would present her assessment statement to you, and you would provide corrective feedback, have her reflect on it, and then she would present a new statement. You then repeat this short feedback loop iteratively until she presents an acceptable product. Here's an example of an assessment statement morphing in response to iterative feedback during a coaching session. Okay, so that's our 5-point strategy on giving impactful feedback to your students. That includes setting an environment and expectation for feedback, and the content, amount, and timing of feedback on the wards. Thanks for watching this video. We'll see you in the next video, focusing on writing effective narrative evaluations.